Thanks for listening to the Gray Ave Podcast. We meet inspiring people from around the world and learn from them. From entrepreneurship, health, travel, lifestyle, and more. We are also on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher Radio. Rate and write us a review. You can also download each episode on www.grayjabesi.com. Enjoy the show.
Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Gray, and this is another episode of the Gray Ave Podcast. And this is a show where I have inspirational conversations with inspiring people. And today is no different. We have Mitch Bowler from Pencil Kings. He is the founder of Pencil Kings. And for those of you who are not familiar with pencilkings.com, it's actually a platform where they help artists by giving them guidance and support to take the next step in their journey as artists. So basically they give them training in and techniques on how to do great art. And besides that, Mitch was the co-founder of Camisand Media Group, the technical director at Activision, the game company, and senior producer at Vicarian Global. So as you can tell, Mitch has been involved with quite a few things, and he has traveled, and he is definitely a unicorn. I know that you will enjoy listening to his story and insights. He's a very insightful guy and very inspirational. I have to say, the podcast is long, but I guarantee you won't regret it. Everything that was said in there is really helpful. I mean, personally, I found it helpful. That's why it went on and on, because I can always talk with Mitch. He always have very interesting things to pick up from. So just to give you a backstory as well, I did a podcast like over 2 years ago, way before I started the Gray Ave Podcast. I was interviewed by Mitch on his podcast where I shared part of my story and all those kind of things. So if you are interested to hear that, I will leave the link in the description. Maybe you can hear a little bit of my story as well, because I never kind of did that on this podcast. Or one day maybe I'll get somebody to interview me just to switch the sides a little bit. Anyway, I'm trying to make the short intro, but it's going on and on, so I have to stop here. But word for my boss, again, remember to subscribe to the Gray Ave Podcast on iTunes and on your podcast app. And we're on TuneIn right now. So, just make sure I don't get fired. Then you go on iTunes or on your podcast app, subscribe to the Gray Ave Podcast, which most of you has already done. And you just have to write me a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps me grow and do well and, continue doing this. So I really appreciate it. Other than that, enjoy my podcast interview with Mitch Bowler. Thank you.
Sure. So my name is Mitch Bowler. I'm currently these days I run pencilkings.com, and that's my main thing that I do. I formerly was in the video game industry, and a long time before that of the film industry and visual effects, and before that or during that whole process to have done a lot of web design and a bunch of other random graphics things. And these days I mostly help artists online, help mentor them to get careers, to improve their skills, and to work with the Pencil Kings team to try and help as many people as we can.
Right. That's exciting. And besides Pencil Kings, which is what you spend most of your time doing right now, what else have you been doing?
This is pretty much like all encompassing. So formerly, I used to work in the video games industry. I worked for Activision Blizzard, and was in their central technology group. So there we help all the other studios whenever they need a hand. We're there to help them out. So we work very, very closely with Activision's Shanghai studio, where there was a team of artists who would help supplement anything that was needed. So, modeling help, animation help, concept art help. And I was a technical art director there, so I was on top of those people. But these days, Pencil Kings really takes up all of my time. There's not too much time for anything else. There's a few side projects, but they're very closely related to Pencil Kings. So it's pretty much a full-time, taking up all my mental capacity, 24 hours a day job.
Right. So let's just, before we go ahead with what you're doing now, let's just take it a little bit back. The last time you and me spoke I was on your podcast, on the Pencil Kings podcast, which is I think one of the most helpful art podcasts right now on the internet. So you said that I think you were in Germany that at that time. It's like over a year ago. Where are you?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you based right now?
So now I'm back home, or as close to home as possible. So I grew up in a tiny little village of about 650 people called Treeherne, and it's in the province of Manitoba. Now, if you're not familiar with Canada, you probably have heard of Toronto, and you probably have heard of Vancouver. So if you were to take a flight from Vancouver to Toronto, right in the middle of your flight, if you look down, that would be about where I'm from. And if you're from the States, it's North Dakota. We're just across the border from North Dakota. So that's where I started, and I came back. I did a lot of traveling for a lot of years, and just to be closer to family, it made sense to come home right now. But, the winters are brutal, so I'm looking at figuring out how I can escape the winters and stay somewhere warm, because I'm really a warm weather kind of person.
Right. So your story is very fascinating. Let's just start it just for the listeners. I'm familiar with most of it, but like for the listeners who had never heard of Mitch before. You started as a digital artist. You went to a college in your city, in a small city,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, and then after that you worked in visual effects as a art director, and from there you switched from that to teaching English in China. How did that come to mind? It's like, how did you make that jump? Like, what was going on in your mind just to decide to, like, I'm going to leave visual effects and go to China right now?
Okay. So I think I have to go back further. When I was 7 years old, I heard a rumor. So when I was 7, it would have been, the original Nintendo system had come out, and it would have been about 1988. So when I was 7 years old, my friends and I heard a rumor that there was going to be a game that was coming out that would allow you to make your own games. And since I love playing video games, I thought, well, what better thing to do than to make them? I can finally create my own games, because I had lots of my own ideas when I was young. And so I made the decision at 7 years old that I wanted to be a video game maker. I didn't yet know that I would be a video game artist. I just knew that I wanted to be involved in video games somehow. I love drawing at this point, and I did everything that I could to figure out how to make games while I was waiting for this magical game that would come out that would allow us to make our own games. So during this time when I was young, I did programming. I think when I was 10 years old, I made my very first programmed game. It was just a text-based game, but I was trying programming, doing story writing, level design, lots of boxes on paper where, how the player would move from place to place, pretty much everything that I could. And then as I progressed, finally I got, a Super Nintendo, and then we got Mario Paint. This was the first digital art tool that I have. People starting out today are so lucky that you have real tools that you can use. We had pretty much MS Paint. That was all that we had. I don't know if MS Paint even exists anymore. It's so old.
Sorry, that's
then shortly after.
Oh, sorry, that's Microsoft Paint, right? Just for the people listening.
Yeah, Microsoft Paint.
All right.
It basically has no anti-aliasing, no smoothing. It's just like pixels with very crude brushes and whatnot. So continue doing that. Then Doom came out, and Doom 2. And once Doom 2 came out, a very famous computer game, it revolutionized the first person and pretty much started the first person shooter industry. There's a few other ones around the same time, but Doom was the one that broke through and created kind of the first person shooter industry that we know today. And so with Doom 2, there came editing tools that would allow us to edit the game. And so finally, I had a computer at this point, and I could start to edit and put my own artwork into an actual game. So this passion for games never really left, but I was still in a small village of only 650 people. So I continued to try and figure out how I could work in games. And it was about when I was 14 or 15 years old that we finally got the internet. The internet was very new at this time, and so I started following an artist named Paul Steed, who was on the Quake team, and he started to talk about what it was like to create 3D models for Quake. And so I continued working and trying to teach myself. There weren't many game colleges at the time or anything like that. It was such a new industry that there weren't really teachers for it. And what happened was that there was a local company here doing Flash animation, and because I was learning pretty much everything under the sun, I was also learning Flash, and I was able to get a job there doing Flash animation for the web and for television. And that's how I got started as a digital artist.
Perfect. And then from there, how did you transition from? I'm still curious. What was your train of thought when you left visual effects and then decided to go to China just to teach English? Because from that point, it sounds like you grew up wanting to work with games and computers, right?
Yeah.
And then what was the motivation?
Yeah, I know exactly what it was. So I was at this time I was in university. I was taking a fine arts program, and I didn't really know what I was getting into. I didn't realize the difference between fine arts and commercial arts, and I don't think most of my colleagues or classmates knew either, because almost everybody had to go back to school and get other degrees in order to become employable. Because a fine arts degree, there's not a huge demand for painters in this world, unfortunately, of painting random things. However, there's a huge demand for commercial artists, people who can create pretty pictures to help sell things, to make things look interesting. So during this time in school, I dropped out after my first year because I realized it wasn't any good, and I worked for this Flash animation company. And the two brothers who owned the company, they were big world travelers. And when I said, okay, I'm going to leave the studio when it was the end of the summer, because I was working for them out in the countryside in another small village, even smaller than the village where I grew up. And I said, okay, I'm going to leave the countryside. I want to go back to the city. That's where I should be. And they said, fine, but don't just go to school, don't just work, go travel. And they were big advocates of traveling. And that kind of just stuck with me for a little bit. And so then I went back to school, and while I was still working in school, I got a job at a visual effects company doing a lot of previs work. We did some post, I did some animation. It was kind of cool because it was a quickly growing company, so I got to do pretty much everything. I started off in previs, but I did camera matching, I think it's called. It's so long ago that I did this stuff. I know I did rotoscoping. I was in the lighting and rendering department. I did modeling. I did particles and effects. So pretty much everything that you can do aside from programming and scripting, I was doing it there. But what I found, even though I was working on really cool projects, the very first project that I got to work on was X-Men 2, designing a lot of the action sequences with the previous team. What I found is that the work wasn't very fulfilling, not nearly as fulfilling as I would have thought working on a famous project would be. Because I just, this idea came into my head that I'm not really affecting the world in a positive way by working in visual effects. Yes, people enjoy going to movies, but I just felt like I was and this is literally what I thought, I'm creating the popcorn of life. And it's not to demean anyone else that is in this industry and loves this industry. It's just I knew it wasn't for me. And I felt like video games, which was more interactive, that had possibilities, or at least I thought it had possibilities to touch people in a much deeper way, because they can interact with the medium versus watching a film, which is just one way. You sit there and the screen beams information at you and you just take it in. So working there and not feeling too fulfilled by the work, even though it was really cool projects and really cool company and great people I was working with, I on a whim, like I was just about to graduate school. I went back and finished my degree as quickly as possible. I got special permission to take extra credits so that I could finish my degree roughly in 2 years by going to summer school instead of the usual 3 years. And I saw this ad in a newspaper, and it was like, go abroad and teach English. And I just on a whim, I don't know, I don't even remember really why I went to look at it, but I did. And it said, come to this free information session at this hotel. And I remember that it was just pouring rain that night. one of those, cats and dogs type of rain. And so I went to this information session at this hotel in the basement, and there was a guy speaking about what it was like to teach English overseas. And it sounded pretty cool because I knew that I needed a change. School was done. The girl that I was dating, that had ended. And I wasn't being fulfilled with visual effects, which was kind of disheartening because to work on a high-profile project, you would think that would be ultimately fulfilling. And when I found out that it wasn't, I knew I had to make, a bigger change. So these three things were kind of done: school, girl, and job. And I go to this session, and the guy's talking about these different countries that you can go to. And so at the end of the session, he asked everybody, he's like, well, where would you like to go and teach English? And people are mentioning different countries. I remember one person said, well, I'd like to go to Ukraine. And the instructor, the guy leading the session was like, oh, Ukraine, you're going to have so many offers for marriage when you go to Ukraine. The person who had asked the question was a man. And then somebody else said, oh, I'm thinking about going to Brazil. And he said, oh, Brazil, that's the place where you're never going to want to come back home. And to me, that sounded pretty appealing because I grew up in this small town where I felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like I didn't have anything left for me in the city. My family had always lived outside of the city, so it's not like they were in there, and I knew there was nothing for me in the country. So a place that was so good that you would never want to come home, that sounded pretty good, kind of like going to Candyland or something like that. So I come back to where I was staying, the apartment, or it was actually a house, and I was telling my friend about this training session that I went to and saying like, oh, I'm going to go to Brazil. The teacher said it's the best place in the world. And it's funny how like one person's opinion can really sway you. And again, the internet was still fairly new then. And so I didn't really have any kind of sense of what Brazil might be like. And my friend said, no, don't go to Brazil, go to China. And this is about in 2001 or so. He said, don't go to Brazil, go to China, power of the world. And as long as you have money, China's just like here. It's great. And basically meaning that your standard of living wouldn't be any lower, which I had no idea what that would mean. But I took his advice. Like I let it enter my brain and thought about it. And it just so happened that one of the brothers who I had worked with in that first animation company doing flash animation, he had gone back to China because he was a big traveler, and there was a city in China that him and his wife had met at, and he really he liked living there, and he was in his own process of changing careers to go forward with development. So he invited me, or we arranged for me to stay with him. I can't remember exactly what it was, and I really looked up to him as a mentor. So I was excited to go to China. One of my really good friends that I respected, he had said, China's great. I believe he had been before. And I had my mentor there who was willing to help me get started. And I was going to go over there and teach English. And so that's what I did. And it was a really great transition point because what happens when you go abroad is that, especially to a place like China where you don't understand the language and you can't read anything, it's like all of a sudden you're illiterate. You don't watch TV anymore. And again, remember, there was no Netflix or anything like that back then. You don't really watch TV anymore. There was no Facebook. So you're pretty much just alone. And you can't read magazine ads. You can't read any ads. You can't read a newspaper. You can't read most of the books. There are English bookstores, but they're not everywhere. And so you kind of just become illiterate, which is really cool because now you don't realize how much of a hold media has on you. And when you're able to go abroad and kind of forcefully unplug, it would be a lot harder today because there's so many ways that we can connect with Facebook and everything. But back then, this is what it was like for me. It really just allowed me to sit and focus on working on my 3D. And it took me a little while to figure out how the whole English teaching thing worked. But what I was able to do was stack multiple students on the same day in groups. So what that meant is that on Saturday, I would work for about 4 hours and teach maybe 15 or so students. And then on Sunday, I would work for about 4 hours. So I'd work 8 hours total a week, and that would pay for all my bills. So 2 half days, basically one full day of work, and then the rest of the time was my time. And so I used this other time to really start to get serious about working in video games, and finally uh, um, made this decision that I was going to make it happen and just take things to the next level of seriousness. And this is one of the things that, in talking with other artists on the Pencil Kings podcast, that I've started to realize that it's like, for most people, there's a decision that they make at some point where they say, okay, I'm going to do it, and there's really no turning back. And almost everybody that's made this decision, they knew when it was. They could pinpoint almost to the day or month when they made that decision, and then after that, it was sort of like only a matter of months before they were hired to do whatever it was that they wanted to do in the creative field. And if you haven't made that decision yet, or if you're like thinking maybe I made the decision, if you think maybe you made the decision, you haven't made the decision yet, because you'll definitely know. It's like an on-off switch. The lights in your house aren't maybe on. They're either on or they're off, just like you've made the decision to move forward with your career or not. And so I made the decision and started working more towards games. And while I was over in China teaching English a little bit, I was also still doing work for visual effects, for the visual effects company back in Canada. And that was kind of cool, being able to work remotely, and kind of got me a little taste of what outsourcing was like. And from there, I went back to Los Angeles, worked in visual effects for a little bit, because there was a job opportunity, again, with the same visual effects company. And even though I'd already known that visual effects wasn't the right thing for me, the opportunity was just too good to pass up. So basically, I was sitting there in China working on video game stuff, doing a little visual effects outsourcing, and teaching a little bit of English, along with other things. When you have that much free time, it's pretty crazy, like what you have to do to fill up that much free time. So I started to learn go-kart racing, learn Chinese, and I would practice Tai Chi for about 2 or 3 hours a day, as well as watch pretty much every DVD that was available at the time. And the opportunity that was so good was to go and work in Los Angeles, like right in Burbank, which, if you don't know where that is, that's where the Warner Brothers studio is in Burbank. And for me, it just seemed too cool to have grown up in this tiny little village of 650 people, with a dream of one day working in video games, and most people not believing in my dream or not understanding what my dream was. And I just had the faith myself. And to be able to go and work in Hollywood, it kind of felt like that was making it, in some way. And so without much hesitation, I was like, yeah, let's go to Los Angeles. And I think I may have even flown straight from China to Los Angeles to start working there, and worked there for about a year before I finally went back to work and start my own video game studio. And that's where my real career as a video game artist officially started, where I started from the bottom and worked on projects that never saw the light of day. Most of the projects were people with big hopes and dreams of making video games, but now that I look back on it, there was probably a 0% chance that they would succeed. We were able to work on a few projects that got published, but the majority of them were, never anything that you would hear of or really be proud of. It was just, but that's where you start. You don't, most people don't start at the top or working on something amazing. I was lucky that I got to start working on a project like X-Men 2, but that's not where most people started. So I feel like my video game career was more. Was a lot similar to how it really works, where you just get any job that you can. You take work from anybody as long as it's kind of leading you in the right direction, and then you continue to build your skills. You build your ability to communicate with clients, how organized you are, and you build your reputation, and you keep going upward from there.
Right. So where did you start your own video game company? Was it in China or it was in Los Angeles?
It was in China. Yeah. So when I was over there teaching English, I realized that the Chinese culture was very passionate about gaming. You'd see people who are basically living at these internet cafes playing online games, and they were also very talented artists. And from my experience working in or going through the fine arts program, these Chinese artists seem much better trained in classical foundations where they can create realism, which not all video games focus on realism, but a lot of them do. And if you have that foundation in realism, you can take that in a lot of different ways, because what it basically means is that you can get the end result that you're looking for. Like you can look at a photo and you can match that with what you're creating. Just like if you're to change that and work on cartoon style, it might take a little bit of time to adapt, but you could look at the style of the cartoon drawing and you could adapt your drawing to match that. And so I saw this really big opportunity in China to go back and start a small outsourcing studio of my own.
Right. So, it's like your approach in your career is very interesting to me. That it was never like I would say infused in one thing. It's like it was never subjective. Just say like I just want to be a video game artist. It's like you let yourself sometimes go with the flow and look for opportunities as you go, and you can transform and change with time. It's like that's one thing that a lot of artists don't have. When do you think that developed in you?
I think the thing that's different for me that the thing that's different that I do from a lot of artists that I see and that I've talked with is that I'm able to tolerate a lot of risk. Like to go to China and start a video game studio when you've never worked in video games before, but that's just what you've always wanted to do, and China seemed like a good place to do it. That sounds like completely crazy to a lot of people, but to me, I didn't even think too much about it. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. This confidence, or maybe it's ignorance. I'm not sure exactly where it comes from. But yeah, it allows me to just keep going. And with art, there was always like an inner confidence and even a bit of cockiness that I knew that I was going to make it, and I knew that things were going to work out. And so I just kept going forward. And I was never the best artist in any of the studios that I worked in, except possibly when I ran my own studio and we only had like 2 employees and I was mentoring them. But quickly we hired people who are still better than me. So I was never the best artist, but there was this confidence and cockiness that everything would be okay because I was on the team and I was willing to work harder and do whatever it took in order to make the project be successful. And I think that's why I was able to, go to different places and kind of make it what I want. And that's probably the reason why I went and started and dove headfirst into Pencil Kings as well, because from the outside looking in, it's crazy to do this. It's not normal. Like, why would I had built a very successful, very well-paying job at a very respected company with all kinds of perks. Why would I throw that all away and go and start from the bottom again? And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I feel like, again, it's something that it's just a matter of time that, people look at it and be like, wow, Mitch did something amazing here. But what they don't see is the sort of 5 years of failing that came before it and the struggles to get to the sort of the end goal. And I don't know what comes after this, but probably after this project, I will slow down and go the family route, because it's pretty full on the way that I approach my career and what I do. I don't stop thinking about it. It's pretty much 24/7. Even when I'm out with friends, I try and find friends who can relate, so I can have conversations that's relatable to what I'm working on right now.
Right. So, like, if I think of you and your stories, like, to me, you fall too much into the category of the hustle. And you talk a little bit about that with some of your guests on your podcast. Um, what I would like to ask you is, I know a lot of people get in whatever different careers they have, get to the point that where they feel like what they're doing, they're not maybe contributing more to society, or like, well, I can relate to what you said when you say that you reached to a point where you didn't feel like you're making popcorn for, for people. It's like popcorn for life. It's like
Yeah.
you're not making an impact on something in some way that would fulfill, the type of person that you are. But then because people got a 9 to 5, they kind of stick to that just because it feels right, even though they know or they don't feel right about it. Like, how would somebody transform that and just go do what they want? Even let's say that they're not sure exactly what they want to do, but like at the place where they are right now, they don't feel right. They don't feel fulfilled, like that what they're doing is actually impactful.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to this is, because I feel like the large majority of, if people are truthful with themselves, that they would say that they're not engaged. And I've always felt like, why would you ever do something with your life that you're not engaged in? I can see, like, I took the job to go back to visual effects because I wanted to work in Hollywood, and that's fine. Like, there was a reason. I wanted to feel like I had made it. I wanted to feel like I had done something and went somewhere cool. But if I was sitting and feeling like, okay, I'm making the popcorn of life, and just in my hometown, there's no real reason for me to continue. And it's always been like that for me personally. And I guess if somebody's in that mode, I would really just start asking, like, what are you really doing with your life? And because I want more people to kind of wake up and do something cool, or do something that you believe in, or do something that helps somebody else out. It could be that you just don't have any way out and you have to stay in this 9 to 5 job. You've got a kid, you've got maybe a sick parent that you have to take care of. These are all stories that I hear again and again from people who want to do more creative things. However, you can volunteer your time, you can work somewhere else, you could find somebody who's trying to do something bigger and see how you can help them. I've had very few people come up to me and say, hey, can I just help Pencil Kings for free? This is something that I did a ton when I was younger. Just going up to people who are working on things that I thought were cool and saying, like, hey, I want to help out with this. Same like somebody could help Gray. Edit his podcast for him. If you don't have the time to organize guests and make your own podcast, or you don't feel like you're good enough on the radio, you can still be a part to help build these bigger things. So I don't know if that answered it. I feel like I'm a little bit on a soapbox right now, but I had one more thing that I wanted to say. So for me personally, if I'm not engaged, and so if you can ask yourself, like, are you engaged in what you're spending the majority of your time on? And at this point, or this has happened a few times, but at one point in my life, I was working as an online designer. So I was doing illustration for a magazine, and I was helping them with their online promotions, doing flash animation and website design and postcards and whatnot. It was a company, it was a magazine that was going through the transition of being kind of like offline only to starting to do more things online. And I was about 19 or 20 years old. I got this job when I dropped out of university, and so I was working there. It was the only job, I think, until the very end of my career where I had an office. I was at 19, I had an office. It was pretty cool. They treated me great, but they didn't have enough work for me to do. And so I didn't know how to handle this, and I started just wasting time. Like, I would take half an hour bathroom breaks just sitting there because I was bored. There's nothing to do. And I would like pretend I was working and sleep at my desk. These are definitely not good things to be doing. And I just said, okay, this job isn't working for me. They don't have enough work, and I'm not growing in the way that I want to. I'm going to give it 30 days to try and be a better employee and try to turn this situation around. And this is what I've always done, 30 days. If the situation doesn't improve in 30 days, then I leave the situation. So 30 days came, I couldn't improve it, and I just left, even though it was a fine job. This is where I feel like a lot of people get stuck. They're like, oh man, my boss, he just never has anything for me to do, and they complain instead of taking action and taking control of their lives and doing something about it, because you're in control. You can change what's going on. And just further to this, I later read this book called The Success Habits by Jack Canfield. And I don't know if he came up with this or somebody else did. So whoever originated it, I'm not sure. But basically, it's this book of 100 success habits. It's way too much to read. I mean, I'm sure someone has read it, but I think I never got past about 10 of the success habits. But habit number 1 is maybe one of the biggest ones that anybody can learn and start to apply. And that's to take 100% responsibility for everything that happens in your life, good or bad. So in a case where it's like, oh, I'm not engaged in my life. I wish I could do something more engaging. I'm not engaged in my career. Do something about it. Don't just complain about your boss. Don't say, oh, my boss is an idiot. He's too disorganized to give me any more work. It's like, well, maybe he is and maybe he isn't, but you're the one who has responsibility for your own happiness, your own career development. So take control and stop giving that control to other people. I think that's about it. So unfortunately, I guess our recording got interrupted, and so I just want to pick up a little bit where I left off and talking about how artists and just anybody needs to really take full responsibility for their lives. And this is one of the big things that I've done, that even in a bad situation, even when things feel like they're out of your control, like say, for example, you're driving in your car and somebody hits your car, it's really hard to take responsibility for that car accident happening, especially if somebody just crashes completely into you. You have this mindset and this way of thinking about the world and how things work. Even in that type of situation where it's really difficult, you can look and see like, well, was there anything really that I could have done differently to use as a learning experience, and so that you can get better in the future. So maybe, you're in your car and unfortunately you got hit. Maybe, was there something you could have done differently? Could you have checked more closely? Were you accelerating as fast as you could through the intersection to be the first car through the gate? Whatever it is. And this really comes down to your career, what you do with your art, and just saying like, you're in charge of this. You're responsible for your results or lack of results. Same for your health and really every aspect of your life. If you can start taking responsibility, then all of a sudden, instead of leaving the control to other people and circumstances, now you've taken the control back for yourself so that you're able to move forward and adjust the situation so that it works in your favor instead of everything working against you.
Right. So it's like I can relate to the issue of blaming others for your problems, like bosses and all these kind of things. But like, to what level could you put the blame on someone? I mean, I think that there's no way you can always blame someone, because like people always say complain about the government or complain about their spouse or complain about their friends, like they're kind of pulling them back in whatever they want to do. I personally feel like there's no way you can blame anyone, because it's 100% on you just to do something about it, because you know exactly what you need. So the question I like to ask is that, to what level can you actually put a blame on someone, in your opinion?
I don't. I always put the blame on myself for everything. Like I really have embraced this mindset and this way of looking at the world 100%, that it's always my fault. I just say like, it's my fault. And it doesn't mean that the thing, you can't, like, let's say something bad happens and you say, okay, well, how is this my fault? Maybe it's not your fault, but in some ways it's within your responsibility and it's in your ability to change the situation in the future. So your boss is always crushing you with overtime and you're just complaining about it. Instead of complaining about it, start doing something about it. Start looking for your next job. Start looking for that step up from wherever you're at to get into a situation where you really love the work that you do.
All right. But then for you, with all this kind of lifestyle that you take, like taking up on risks and stuff, have you made any challenges that were like made you question, say, like maybe the normal, typical way of living is worth it at all?
Well, can you explain or give an example?
It's like the way you approach things, kind of very unconventional and stuff. The way you approach your career, the way you make your moves. Have you reached to a point once or twice where you felt like, oh man, this is actually bad, or like questioned yourself to change the way you do things?
Not really, because I feel like for the most part, even though not everything is perfect, that I really enjoy where I'm at, the people that are in my life, the relationship that I have with my family, my girlfriend, all that stuff. And so even the bad moves, I feel like were necessary to get me to where I am right now. So let's say in the moment I'm in a really bad place, I could just flip that and say like, okay, well, this is just a really big challenge that life is throwing at me at the moment. How am I going to get through this? Because these challenges that life throws at you it's never going to stop. It's always going to keep coming. And when you think you've got everything solved and perfect and you're trying to control everything, all of a sudden a health issue will come, or a health issue will hit somebody that you love. And that's completely out of your control. There's nothing that you can do about it. You can just address the situation at hand. So I don't think there's anything really where I regret. It's like, let's say, for example, I started my very first video game studio. We ended up losing $40,000. There was a very big lesson in there. There was a $40,000 lesson that I learned about dealing with clients. Unfortunately, it cost me a lot of money, where if I had, say, maybe a mentor or somebody who was looking out for me, they could have saw the writing on the wall far before I got to the uncomfortable situation where I just had to realize, okay, I lost all this money. This has happened more than once where, especially speaking with money, I think it's something that it's easier to measure than a lot of other things. So I had two big business failures. You could say another one's where I took out a bunch of government loans. We have government programs here in Canada where they can help small businesses because they're trying to help small businesses grow so they can create more jobs for Canadians, which is great. So we applied for these loans. We got them. Everything was looking good. And the industry that we were involved in was the internet. And so one of the things that we depended on was for Google to stay the same, which we didn't really realize was a huge risk at the time. And then Google went ahead and had a huge update to their algorithm. And then the money that we had spent and invested in these websites, that all just pretty much got wiped away overnight. It's the second time Google's come and made changes. But even in these situations, I feel like it helps me to grow and become more resilient as a business person and just as a person in general, and realize like, well, money was lost, but it's not the end of the world. Like, I'm not going to stop taking risks or living my life or trying to do the things that I want to do. It just means that the next time that I do them, I have to be a little bit more cautious or do a little bit more research and spend some time thinking, like, what are the potential risks here? Like, how can I be hurt by things that are not in my control? If it is in my control, then what can I do to fix it?
Right. And do you have any reactions to like those moments when things didn't go right? Is there something that you do to help smoothen out the pain or like the moment, or you just typically just move on?
I think it just keep going. You just keep moving forward onto the next thing. And usually for myself, there's, I have several things that I'm working on or interested in at the same time. I feel like I have a never ending list of things that I want to do in my life. So it's kind of just like, well, if one thing goes away, then there's time and opportunity to do something else. However, I will say one thing, that there was a particular time in my life where I had, how to say this? There was a relationship that went really bad, and every time I thought about that relationship, it would bring up the bad feelings. So this could be like an ex-boyfriend and girlfriend who you feel have hurt you or wronged you in a particular way. It could be some way that you feel about your parents. It could be your boss, your job, but a bunch of other things. But anyway, this one was a human-to-human relationship between me and an individual. And every time I thought about this person, it brought up bad feelings. And so I was going through talking with another entrepreneur about the situation and how I was kind of emotionally and mentally stuck, that whenever this person's name was brought up, it would bring up these bad feelings of what had happened in the past. And this has been going on for a couple of years. And he introduced me to this technique, and I can send you the link for it so you can include it with your show notes, because there's a really short YouTube video, and it's this thing called tapping. So you basically like tap on your head and your temple and your neck and a couple other places. And you do this tapping and you say some words about how you're going to release and let go of these feelings. And it's totally woo-woo. I didn't know if it would work, but it only took me, like probably a minute to do it once, and I did it for about 15 minutes, just letting go of these feelings. And what I found was, and the only way that I can kind of explain it in a way that makes sense to me, is that what this tapping is doing is releasing, or it's resetting the emotional connection that you have towards some catalyst, some object or person or thing or whatever it is that causes these uncomfortable feelings to come up. So in the process of doing the tapping, you reset that from having like a toxic relationship to having more of like a ground zero level relationship where you can then objectively look at the situation again and just say like, is it really bad or good? Or, like maybe it doesn't change what had happened. But now instead of whenever you think of it, you have this toxic feeling that, it's not good to feel like that. Instead of having this toxic feeling, you can now just say like, yeah, it was just a bad thing that happened. There's been a lot of bad things that have happened in my life. Why I was particularly attached to that one, maybe in my mind that was the worst one that I had ever experienced, but or it could be some other reason. But you're able to just like reset that and start moving on with your life again, which is the most important part, being able to continue to move forward and not dwell on the past. Just be here today and have big dreams for what you want to do tomorrow and in the future, and then just keep working towards those big dreams.
Right. So people would ask me sometimes, like, okay, if you analyze the risk, or like if you're getting into a new business or whatever you're doing, like you're making a big career move, what's going to happen if you fail and all this? So my reaction to that is that I put everything on ground zero. That look, I analyze the risk, and if it fails, I accept the fact that I'm going to crash. Maybe I'm going to lose everything that I have, and that's okay. So I feel like that makes things easier for me to actually go into new things or taking risks without being afraid of losing anything. How do you approach like risk analysis and like what's going to happen, the end result of failure, if it may occur?
Well, I think like you, I tried to prepare for it beforehand. And I think there's a lot of ways that you could do this, just like, you buy a house and you buy insurance. There's a lot of things in life that I'm starting to realize that I didn't before that you can buy insurance against. And my eyes were kind of opened to this when, for our podcast, the Pencil Kings podcast, I was interviewing a lawyer about whether or not fan art is legal. And that episode went live recently. And one of the things we were talking about was the movie called Super Size Me, if you remember it, where a guy went on the McDonald's diet and just saw what would happen. So he just ate McDonald's every single day. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a pretty fascinating documentary. And so to make this, he needed investors. And this is all secondhand information, so the real story might be different. So I just want to say that before I get into this. So if I have some facts wrong, I apologize. But as it was told to me, here's what I remember. So he was going to make this movie. He had investors, and the investor said, well, if you make this, McDonald's is going to come after you. So we need to take out this insurance policy against this, because if that happens, there's no way that this movie is going to be made, because we'll just be buried in legal fees, and it will just be horrible for everybody, and we may as well not even start the project. So there's all kinds of insurance that you can buy for particular situations in your business. You can look into that stuff. I mean, depending on what kind of business you're doing. For me personally, I've always felt like the worst thing, because if I'm in a safe job that I'm not engaged and I don't feel like I'm doing something that's rewarding to me personally, or is like moving things forward or helping people in a way that's meaningful to me, then I'm wasting my time. And I don't want to waste my time. And so that's why I do what I do now. However, in the past, I've been very good at saving money. So I know that even though I'm taking a risk, I've saved to take this risk. So that might mean if you're in a day job that you're living off of far less than you need, and you're saving that money so that you have 1 year worth of minimal living savings. And what I mean by that is, let's say that in your job you make something like $5,000 a month, but you're able to cut your expenses and live on $1,500 a month, so that you're able to save $3,500. So that means for every month that you work and get paid $5,000, you're basically buying yourself about 2 months of time that you can work on your own project. So that's one way to protect against it. So you're not just like quitting and jumping into the deep end. You have some savings, some ramp up time or leeway time. I forget what the official
Right.
word for it is. And then the other thing is saving for your retirement, so that through this whole crazy process of the different risks and the things that I've done, I have been saving for retirement, so that I'm not, I wake up one day and I've been taking all these risks and none of them have really panned out in a significant way, that I'm, retirement age and I have nothing left for me. That would be a horrible situation and very irresponsible. So during the whole process, I've always been saving for retirement. And sometimes, if you're making a lot of money, you can save more for retirement. And then when you're making less money, you save less for retirement. But the important thing is that you're just aware of like what's coming down the road and going to be inevitable that you're going to have to pay for. And so preparing for that, because it's not that hard to start saving money and living off of less than what you're doing or than what you need right now. Like there's so many things you can say no to, so many meals where it's like, okay, well, I could go out for this meal with my friends, or I could have them in and do a potluck or something like that. And so instead of spending $30, you're spending maybe $10. And so then you've saved $20, and you can, take that $20 that you would have spent out of your wallet and put it into a little jar. I have a little jar beside me here right now. Let's clink it around. It's a Pringles can. I don't know, wherever people live, they have Pringles that come in the can, but I just take a little knife and cut the top, cut a little slot off the top. And whenever I've got change, because we have $1 and $2 coins here in Canada, so whatever, and I like to use cash. So whenever we, at the end of the day, whatever money I have, I always put it in this jar, and that's like another form of savings that's on top of whatever I save that just automatically comes out of my bank account. And this is like a huge way that allows me to sleep at night and know that, no matter whatever happens, I'm living off of less money than I could be. And this is allowing me to do the things that I want to do. But even while doing that, I'm still saving for retirement, and I'm preparing for the future.
All right. And then besides that, what are you afraid to lose, if there's anything like that?
The two big things I've always been afraid to lose are my eyes and my hands. And this has always been a huge fear from when I was in my early 20s, and I don't know where it came from, but when I looked around at the artists when I was working in a studio, I thought, wow, if anyone lost their hands or their eyes, they're pretty much unemployable. So, or at least you'd have to take on something completely different. I'm not sure what that would look like, but so I've been afraid of that. And then that's when I realized that I needed to take some kind of a leadership role so that I'm not using my hands and eyes as much. Now, I don't know if I've achieved that. I have a team that helps me with Pencil Kings. We do a lot more than I could on my own. But if I was to stay in the art world, it would have meant that I would become more of like a manager or producer role, because it's really taxing on the body, and it's quite sad when you go to a comic convention or any kind of like graphics arts convention and you see people in the condition of their hands and the contraptions that they have strapped to their hands and their wrists in order that they can keep working because they're in such bad shape.
All right. So I think the next question would be, you moved to China and started a video game company.
Mm-hmm.
What were the first things that you did? Like, that was your first company, right?
Mm-hmm. I guess my first bigger company, like since I was a kid, I've always been trying to sell things and get something started. But yeah, that was the first real company, I'd say.
How was the experience like? Like just going to a foreign land and like you don't really speak the language. What was the first thing that you did to make sure that you could actually start the company in China?
So when I went to China the first time, just as an English teacher, and I was still doing visual effects. So when I was there the first time, I actually did learn some Chinese. Like I lived on my own, so I had a lot of problems that I had to solve and a lot of language that I had to learn. I had local friends and we would only speak in Chinese. I mean, I wasn't able to have great conversations, but I could get my meaning across, and we could have fun and share laughs and whatnot. So. The second time I went back is when I started the company. And I think like for some people, there's a lot of red tape that they need to go through in order to be on the right side of the law and the right side of having everything done perfectly to the book. I'm not that kind of person, and I would be willing to bet that most entrepreneurs aren't like that. It's not that we're trying to cheat the rules, but it's just that sometimes the rules don't make a lot of sense. And especially when you're just starting out, it can be really difficult if you're trying to do everything by the book.
So true.
And so what we had was we had a local contact who helped us navigate things a little bit. And anytime we were worried, we set up our office in an apartment. We didn't get any special zoning. We didn't apply for any special paperwork. We didn't have any we had contracts, I believe. So long ago now, it's hard to remember. We had some kind of contract with people because obviously there's NDAs to sign and whatnot, or non-disclosure agreements is what an NDA is. And but we just did it and thought that, if you ever got to the point where you're big enough, that's when you have to start make sure everything works like it should. And I think I'm much better at having everything work properly now, especially now that I'm back in Canada and things are more set up and more established. But in China, especially the time when I was there, really was like the Wild West of entrepreneurship in Shanghai. And I didn't realize what a crazy time and opportunity it was until years and years later. But really, we just said, okay, we're doing this. We're starting to contact companies and we're trying to get work. And we just did it. And I think like a lot of businesses, that's how they start. You just do it. You don't worry about, as long as you're not hurting anybody. Like if you're manufacturing something with this toxic process and everyone was going to get some kind of crazy disease by working at your place, obviously don't do that. That's part of the reason why all these rules and regulations are in place. But if you're starting a little company to make pictures for people across the ocean, I don't really see how that's hurting anyone at all, at least in my eyes. So I was comfortable with the risk. And whenever we, like I was saying before, whenever we came to a situation where we weren't comfortable with the risk, then we could talk to this business advisor who is more, he was local to Shanghai, and he was familiar with how things really operate versus how you might think things operate. And so for a tiny little minuscule company, we just went for it.
Right. And how did you ended up in Germany? Because the last time we were talking, you were in Germany last year.
Yeah. So Germany, like I met a woman in Germany, and because at the time my business was very mobile, the team was all virtual, so I was able to go and spend time with her there in Germany. And I've always wanted to go back to Europe. I visited once when I was a teen. And just thought, I thought I was going to be getting married and getting engaged and everything. So it just made sense to go there for the sake of the relationship. So that was the main reason why I was in Germany. But, it's a very amazing country and a world leader and lots of amazing people. And it's really interesting to experience the culture in a firsthand kind of way, like in the way that an exchange student would, where you go and you live with somebody in the culture, versus when a lot of people are traveling, they'll go and they'll take a friend, and that's fine. To bring a little piece of home with you, but I feel that when you are able to go, like if you can go alone and travel somewhere, you have a far richer experience of what the local culture is really like. Because when you go with a friend, it's like 90% of your time is spent with somebody from your own culture, and you're experiencing it together. So you get to share that with somebody and have this lifelong experience that you both, can talk about, which is really nice. But if you're going there to grow and learn about the culture and grow personally, I think you really need to do it alone. And that's where a lot of the growth occurs. And that's one of the first things I learned when I went overseas to China for the first time, not knowing the language, was that I felt like I grew about 2 years in the, approximately 1 year that I spent there, because of all the challenges I had to overcome, the language I had to learn, just had to completely reorient myself. And so when you're able to stretch yourself outside of your comfort zone like that, you learn and you grow a lot.
Where did you live in China?
The first time I lived there, I lived in Xiamen. I might spell this wrong now. Xiamen. And it's an island city nearish to Taiwan, just on the southeastern coast of China. And then the second time I went back, I lived in Shanghai, and Shanghai is where I spent the majority of my time.
Right. And I don't know if this happened to you, but like if you worked in visual effects or in a very arty environment, and you start doing business, you a lot of your time tend to be taken out by the business side, like admin and just making things right. Do you ever feel the conflict that you're not doing enough in terms of art, like creating things? Because the business stuff is not. It's like it's hard to quantify what actually you're achieving. Or if you see it on your computer trying to make something in 3D, or you're trying to paint on paper, you can kind of see how your time is being spent. I don't know if that makes sense to you, what I'm trying to say, but like, do you ever feel the conflict between the two?
Oh, definitely. I think if you want to be an artist and be known as an artist, don't become a business owner unless the business is really just like you making art. As soon as you start building a team around you, it becomes very difficult. And you could take a look at, say, like Andy Warhol, for example, of somebody who, employed a lot of people. He still retained the name at the end of the day of like, this is Andy Warhol's art, but he's not actually the one creating it. He was more like running a business. And so it really comes down to what you want to do. And these days I have very little time for creating my own art. I know I could make more time, but it just seems like you have to prioritize what you're trying to do. I'm trying to impact education for the arts. And to impact education doesn't necessarily mean that I need to be the best artist or be a known artist. It means that I have to be really in tune with what people need who are learning art, and be really spend a lot of time with the beginner artists so that I can understand where they're running into problems and what kind of creative solutions that we need to come up with to help those people. So that's where I spend like 99% of my time, working with and thinking about the challenges that these people have and how we can better serve them, versus, mastering techniques in Photoshop.
And then what was the last project you worked on as far as visual effects?
Visual effects was a long time ago. That like when I originally got started with my career was with visual effects. So maybe 2001, 14 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Something like that. 2002.
Right. And what has been some of the most eye-opening moments with Pencil Kings? Like, do you think that you had no idea? They just came clear to you after you started?
Most eye-opening moments. I think the biggest eye-opening moment for me personally is the struggle that I've had in just making Pencil Kings work, making it become a viable business. It's definitely not been easy. It's not something where I just jumped in and everything was great. And when it came to art, I feel like I went through a lot of those struggles when I was a kid because I knew what I wanted to do from the age of 7. So a lot of those early struggles of trying to figure out what I'm doing and then becoming good at it, maybe I did that over a 10-year period where I was messing around with a lot of different areas of game development and game design before I settled on 3D art and animation. But when it came to business, it's like a completely different thing that I'm trying to do. And even though it's in the art field, and I can bring a lot of that art knowledge into it, the whole running a business thing is quite different. So I feel like in that way, I'm maybe about like 6 or 7 or maybe 10 years into my journey. But the businesses and the studios that I had started before, those were different. And the last 2 studios, while I was a very important person in how the studio was run, like the operations of it, I wasn't so much on the financial and growing the studio side. I was there to make sure things ran smoothly as far as, getting artwork done and getting it done to a very high level of quality. And so I think that for where I'm at with Pencil Kings, you could maybe say like I'm 6 years into the journey. And when it came to art, it took me like 15 years to really hit my stride. If you say I started at age 7, obviously as an adult, things can move much quicker because you're able to prioritize and know what you don't like, and so you can eliminate a lot of options. Whereas when you're a kid, everything is open, and you're not sure what you like and what you don't like. You just have to try and experiment with things. So I'm sure with Pencil Kings at some point we'll definitely hit our stride and be like, okay, things are really running amazingly now. There'll still be challenges, but haven't hit that yet. And so what's been eye-opening is that now I'm able to take the sort of like the ease that I had in building an art career and talk about that, but then still relate to the beginner artists, because I, in many ways, see myself as a beginner business owner. And so I can relate those same struggles that I'm having with the business to the struggles that people are having with their art, and just kind of be able to marry those two together while still being able to really talk confidently about what it actually takes in order to move your art career forward.
Great. And how long did it take you to make Pencil Kings profitable?
Profitable?
Yeah.
It's kind of a hard question because I could say it took 5 years for Pencil Kings to become profitable, which is the answer that an accountant would give. But I always knew that what we were going to do was much bigger than myself. So if I was to have done things differently in the beginning and just say like, okay, well, it's only me, and I had a business partner when I started who's no longer with the project. But if I said, it's the two of us and we're just paying ourselves, and we're paying ourselves very little, then we could have been profitable earlier. So it's really like this relative number, but I know that to have a big impact, especially in what we're trying to do, it's not something that you can do on a shoestring budget, or if you can, I don't know how to do that. And I think shoestring budgets aren't how most businesses operate.
Right. And how long did you come to a point where you was like, I need a team? Like, when did you started recruiting?
Pretty much from the beginning. I had a business previously doing online art training, and I didn't have a team with this business. And what had happened was that I got busy with my career, and the business just sort of faltered and plateaued, and then eventually died, or almost died. It's still like kicking in a little bit of money, but it's on its deathbed. And so what I learned there is that you need a team to carry the weight, so that different people can focus on what they're good at. And there's a lot of individualized jobs. And when you're trying to do everything, you're not really good at any of those things. So as the business owner, you have to be aware of so many different things and how they operate. But when it comes to like doing the day-to-day, you strive to find somebody who can do it better than you, which is not the easiest thing in the world, especially when you're or at least for me, it hasn't been the easiest task to find somebody who's better than me at a lot of these things. But then through training and mentorship, you try to allow the people that are working with us to grow into their roles and to develop new skills, so that after a time, they are better than you. And in a lot of ways, just the fact that they're able to show up and get things done. Whereas as the business owner, when you have 10 things to do every day, just the fact that the people that you're working with can get things finished, they are better than you, even if they might not do things the same way as you, or to what you perceive as the same quality. It doesn't matter if it doesn't get finished. If it just sits on your hard drive as a half-finished thing, it doesn't. You may as well not have even started it, because it only counts when you're able to release something to people so they can interact and use it.
Right. I think you have sort of answered my next question as well, but I'm just going to bring it up so that you can elaborate. I struggle with that point you brought on like recruiting, finding a team and like getting other people on board. So it's very hard when you're a small business to to actually hire the best people and pay them. So you sort of try to get maybe, people who are who are younger and, enthusiastic, like just graduates. But then you find that you're looking for somebody who is obviously better than you in that specific area, but it's even harder to find those type of people. And then you find other folks that are like, well, not really what I wanted, but like they can do something, but not always what you would do yourself or you would perceive as great. It's like, how do you, then I end up doing everything myself, just like, okay, you know what, I'm just going to do this myself as well. Then, like you said, the time period extends with time as well. Like, now you miss deadlines and all these kind of things. What's your train of thought to actually convince yourself that like what the other people are doing is right as well? Or like, how do you know that this is the right person to keep, and I can kind of mentor them to the point that we can work together on the same level?
I don't know if I have a way to quantify it. I know for us, we heavily rely on documentation. So like, here's how to do something. So it sounds like you're asking a very personal question to deal with your business, which if it's like what I was doing when I had a studio, sometimes it's hard to establish a quality bar when you're creating a new art asset every time. So even though somebody's creating a chair and somebody's creating a treasure chest, how do you make sure that the treasure chest is of the same quality of the chair? And so there's certain like technical aspects when it comes to art that you can use to make sure that things are relative to each other. For example, you could take the UV texture map and have a specific grid pattern, and then make sure that that grid pattern, the squares on that grid are roughly the same size when you put them into the same space. So you could take the chair and you could take the treasure chest and compare them. And if the grid is huge on one and tiny on the other one, well, then you know that the tiny grid is going to have a much higher texture resolution. I'm probably speaking Greek to a lot of people who are listening right now, but to anybody who's familiar with 3D and texturing, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. When it comes to softer skills, you can have checklists of things getting done, and then you can have ways of following up with those. So you might have, if you have more than one employee, they could check each other's work. One of the things that I did that I don't think is it's not a great long-term solution, is that you final everything. So even when I had teams of like 30 or 40 people, I was finaling all their work. And basically what I mean by finaling is just like checking everything for errors. If the error was big enough, that would take like 20 minutes or more, then I'd make feedback notes and pass it back to the artist. If it was less than that, I might just sit and fix it myself, so I could pass it off to the client quickly. Now, this is not a great long-term solution, but I think it's still required in a bigger studio setup to have that person. So then your skill as the business manager and your challenge needs to be, how can you be great at hiring, or how can you hire somebody who's great at hiring, and then employ that person or employ yourself to find that person that can then final the work and sit there and check things. And I find it's quite difficult to find this person with the the attention to detail, the experience to troubleshoot issues that come up, because when you're dealing with artists and 3D technical issues, but I think with any kind of business where there's a technical component, there's the opportunity for technical errors to show up, or bugs in the software that nobody's seen before. You could be discovering new bugs even with the best tested software in the world. And so somebody has to go through and look at that and say like, okay, well, I see this bug. How can we work around it? Can we build a tool that will make it less, and work forward that way? The ultimate level of being able to get past this is by having just replacing people with machines. Unfortunately, this is really difficult in any kind of creative field. If you're making pencils or tires or something, yeah, you can make a machine that just you just load it up with all the resources that it needs to make the pencils, and you push the button, and then it just starts shooting out pencils. That's possible. However, you can build tools that can check things, can check your 3D models, or can check your Photoshop files. Are they named properly? This is something that you could easily build a script in Photoshop that the artist can click a button, and then it gives them an error and says like, hey, you named your things wrong. Click here to look at the documentation, fix the names, then click this button again to check them. And once it's checked and passed, then you could even build a further action into that Photoshop script that would then go and save the file on the server, and the artist couldn't save their file until it had passed, a certain number of technical checks. This only gets you so far, but that's the ultimate level where you can get to, is by using machines so that human error is eliminated from the process.
Great. So one thing that I wanted to talk to you about is around entrepreneurship, which comes as also a very, I think one aspect of it is very personal, like how you take care of yourself, your health, and there's one element where I think most entrepreneurs are like driven and they can feel it, as they work, and there are moments where you don't feel the same motivation anymore, just like maybe for a week or two prior to something that happened previously, like you were traveling and you got back, or whatever happened, you reach to a point where like you don't feel the drive that you normally feel anymore. How do you get yourself like to your normal state where you get going and keep things going?
There's a couple different ways. Like I have an assistant. I used to have what I call freak out days, where I have my to-do list software. We use Asana, asana.com, and I have all my tasks in there. And so I would sit with her, and I'd say like I'm freaking out. I need to go through these things, and she would just help me look through what and prioritize my tasks. I don't usually have like weeks where I'm in a funk. It passes for me very quickly, and usually I find that it's just like getting back into the routine of like what's the most important thing and what do I need to get done, and then making sure that I get enough sleep, which usually means going to bed by 10 p.m. so that I can wake up at 6 or earlier and to start going into work and getting it done, and then turning off the internet. Because for me personally, when I start to feel bad is due to lack of results. And but what I've realized now in working and talking with a lot of entrepreneurs and having mostly entrepreneur friends now is that it kind of goes in waves, and the waves last for years, or last about a year. And so I'm about 6 years into Pencil Kings, and there's a 3-year wave where you wonder if like what you're doing is the right thing to do and if you should be giving up. I've heard other people say that there's this 1,000-day rule where after 3 years is when you really start to understand your business and things start to take off, which can be demoralizing if you're like on year 2 and you hear that and you're like, sweet, I'm on year 2, year 3 is coming up. I just got to get through year 3 and then things are going to go good. But then in year 3, if things aren't looking good and you've kind of subscribed to that idea, you kind of feel a little bit lost. But even if people haven't heard that idea, I've seen this many times where in the 3rd year, people start to lose steam. And then again, in the 5th year, people start to lose steam. So just being aware of that and knowing, you can continue. And I've always felt like consistency is part of what makes me different than other people. So if you go into the podcast directory and you look up the Pencil Kings podcast, there's a part where we weren't consistent. And then I just committed to it, and the team committed to it, and they're helping me. And every week we haven't missed a week in, 2 years or something like that. And so it doesn't mean that every day when the podcast is on, that's when I record it. We definitely work ahead and plan for disaster, plan for me to get sick or team members to get sick so that we have podcasts that are already edited waiting to be released. But just one of my beliefs is if I can just continue to be consistent, that other people will hit that 3-year wall and fall off, or they won't be as consistent. And this is one of the lessons that I learned in the first year, or one of the first businesses that I had online, where I saw an artist who had a website and I thought the drawings were not very good. And so I just dismissed them. And they reached out to me and they said, hey, you want to collaborate and do some stuff? And I dismissed them. I think I just didn't respond to the email. I just gave like a short reply, thinking that I was better than them, which is not the mindset or the way that I operate now. But at the time, I had this air of superiority. And so this artist continued and was just consistent, and I wasn't. And their business continued to grow until it was this huge success, and mine wasn't, because I just fell off at some point. And so that's one of the big lessons that and learnings that I take with me every day is like, I just sit, I do my work, I do the best that I can. I know that I'm not going to be the best in the world, or I'm not aspiring to be the best in the world. I'm aspiring to like show up and do my best for the day, and wherever that leads me to is fine. I don't have to compete with anybody else's results, even though part of me wants to. But I know that if I just show up and I'm consistent, that I'll look back in a few years and be like, wow, look how far we've come just in being ourselves and not trying to be superhuman and getting consistent results.
Right. And how do you switch off? Like after the day or for a weekend or when you need to? Like is it easier for you to do that?
I don't really. I'm always thinking about this, thinking about business, thinking about ways that we can grow. Although I used to work a lot of all-nighters, and now I feel like I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, that if I pull an all-nighter, it's like I'm losing at life. Like that's a score of 0 for the day if I work all night. Even if I accomplish a lot in that night, it's an all-nighter kind of like sets me back a week. And just through tracking happiness and tracking sleep and energy with apps and whatnot, I can see what works and what doesn't for me. And now I know that I need to get enough sleep. I used to work on the weekends all the time. Right now I'm in a crunch period where there's a lot of projects going on, and they're important projects, and so I want to work on them, and I'm enjoying working on them. So I'm working most weekends now and saying no to social things. But I do still try and make time to get out, with my girlfriend, try to get out and see my friends. And once I'm done this crunch period, it'll be back to no work on the weekends. And I don't require my team to work on the weekend. Some of them do a little bit of work on the weekend, but really try to have a healthy work-life balance.
Great. So, does this ever got you into problems, like maybe with your relationships or otherwise, just because you're always thinking about what you're doing with your life, and you can probably switch off sometimes?
Maybe, but I think because I try to be as close to myself as possible at all times with the people who I'm around, that if they didn't like that about me, then they wouldn't want to hang around me. So I think if I was trying to put off this fake air of where I never work, I never think about my business, everything is peachy, and I have this carefree life, and then they saw the reality, then that would be like a deception on my part. And what I've kind of learned is that the best relationships are when you can be the closest to who you really are. I think that's about it.
Great. And what would you say you have? I think you have interviewed hundreds of artists on your podcast. What would you say is the most consistent message that comes from them? Like that, what you have heard a lot, like a piece of advice or words that come up a lot from a lot of the artists you have interviewed?
Some of them will say it directly. A lot of them, I feel like, have done it, but maybe don't realize it. And I say that because I didn't realize it. But it's just, if you want to be an artist or work in the creative field, just, do it. Make that happen. Make the decision that you're going to make that happen. Don't make art something that you do when you remember to do it. Make it a priority, and hopefully it's fun. Because I feel like if art's not fun, it's not much like, you shouldn't force yourself to do this, and you might just not be cut out to have this as a career. You could still dabble. You could still doodle and, use adult coloring books or whatever you want for it to be fun for you. But to have it as a career, I feel like it should be fun because it requires so much extra work to get started versus other fields. And I could be wrong, and it could be, there could be a number of things that we could point our fingers at and say, well, the problem lies here. Why can't you just go to a school and get trained on this thing? But it's just in a lot of ways it's different. It's not like having a recipe that you can apply this recipe to everybody. You're constantly coming up with new stuff. And I know that there's other fields where you're coming up with new stuff all the time, but I can't name them. I can't probably name 10 of them off the top of my head, whereas pretty much everything in art is doing this, unless you're, the job that you have in art is like somebody designs the toys and you just put the toy design in the machine and then it spits out the 3D model of the physical 3D toy. So I think, just this making that decision that you're going to make it happen and then making space for it to happen and having fun with it. And I hope that when you have fun, then that's the thing that allows you to put in more time without having to force yourself. And recently I wrote a book and we're just in the editing phases for this. I think that was the big thing, that when I knew that I wanted to work in video games, but I didn't understand how video games were made. This, goes back to when I was a kid. And so I tried a bunch of different things, writing the stories, programming, creating level designs, creating characters. And then someone gave me a 3D software. It was like, hey, you're interested in games, you should check out this 3D software. And he gave me a copy of the software that I could try out. And that was the turning point. As soon as I opened up 3D Studio Max, I knew that it was something that I wanted to do, and I loved it. I loved messing around and working with these boxes and then turning them into spaceships or robots or whatever it was, and playing with all the plugins. It really just appealed to me. So I think the trick is in allowing yourself a chance to explore what you like, and then trying different mediums, trying different techniques, trying different ways of being creative around that thing that you like. So for me, it was MechWarrior and robots, and 3D lended itself very nicely to that. But to other people, it could be, creative expression, and so they like watercolor. But in doing that, you might also try, how can I use creative expression with screen printing, posters, all kinds of stuff. And then when you find that thing that you really like to do, just do it. And then there's a career in that. Some of the art careers are very lucrative, others not so much. But I think a lot of the creative careers, once you decide that you're serious about it, you can earn a living wage doing it. And I think that that's the most important part. You earn enough to live and do the thing that you want to do and that you love. And that's the secret, that, a lot of people, I don't think that they're doing the thing that they love. They're just doing the thing that happened to be the easiest thing that came to them at the time when they needed a job. And then they started doing it and they never really looked up again. Whereas when you're a creative, you're doing the thing that hopefully you love to do and that you have fun doing. And if you get to that point where you stop love doing it, you can, pivot and look at something else. So, for me, it was making video games. Then I got to the point where I wasn't loving it as much. And then I pivoted to going into art education. And so here's where I'm at. And I love working with the students and the challenge of building a business. And that's why I wake up every day and sit in this computer room and do what I do. And I know that I could put together a demo reel, make some calls, and probably be back in a studio in the next 30 days if I wanted to. But that's not. I want to be where I am right now.
Right. That's actually great advice and great insight. One thing that I just want to finish with is, I learned this from your podcast, from listening to your podcast actually, which is as an artist, when I was 100% an artist, I was making a living off that only. The problem was that I didn't know things like negotiation or like mentors, which is, I think it's still a bigger problem for a lot of artists, and you still have that word. Is it the starving artist? And I think it's a problem that comes with, the artists aren't familiar with the business side of things. It's like they can make good art, but like most of them do not know how to sell, or like just to people skills or negotiation. What are the things that you have learned from your artists in terms of like who have been successful in those domains, or what you consider like your own advice on how to approach negotiation or to find mentors, and how it has helped you in your own career?
I think when it came to art, I had mentors, and then in business loosely. But the way that I approach it these days is I usually just try and find a book on whoever's done the thing that I want to do, and I try to find the best book on it. And depending on how important the skill is, maybe several books. So you can break down the skills that a business person would need, just like you could break down the skills that an artist would need, and have a list of like the top 6 skills that if you were able to master all of these skills, then you would be like in the top 1% of the 1%. So you don't necessarily have to become that master, but just being aware of what those skills are and where you sit in each of those areas gives you a starting point. So then you can start to work on your weaknesses, just like you would work on your art weaknesses. So if it's negotiation, there's several books. The negotiation book that I had recommended to me years ago, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but you can go in and read that and then just see what suits your style. Because one of the things that I found now after reading all these books is that different books work in different ways. So you could read 2 or 3 books on negotiation. It might be the third one that you read from the author that's not nearly as famous, but it's something that they say resonates a lot more with how you see the world and how you operate within the world. So if you just follow the advice of the person that gave you the book, it probably worked for them. I'm sure that there's books out there that aren't truthful, but let's just say that they are. So the advice probably worked for them, but maybe they have some kind of other skill set that's not mentioned at all in the book. The author forgot or didn't realize that this was such a crucial skill set for them to have. So let's say with the negotiation, in order to be great at negotiation, maybe you also needed to be a great conversationalist. But maybe they're just naturally a great conversationalist because their dad or somebody in their family was a great conversationalist, and they were able to model their behavior after, as personal example. And so that was just completely left out of the book. So that's why it's important for you to understand what those main areas are that you need to improve on, so then you can start going for it. And then just work on them one at a time. Like, you're not in this race. You're not going to learn all the skills in 1 year, or very few people have the capacity to do that. It's more like you're just trying to get better every day. So every day you're a little bit better. Every day you're working on whatever your weaknesses are. And hopefully in that you're also able to hire people, like we talked about before, to focus on your strengths. So if negotiation isn't one of your strong suits, at least you could read a book or 2 about it so that you understand the process, and then you could go and hire a lawyer or somebody in the law field that focuses on negotiation, and you hire them to work on your behalf. They know a lot of things, and that's their job, to be experts in negotiation. And then you're able to continue running your business knowing that somebody else is doing this for you.
Right. And just to throw it out there, just explain what is negotiation and why it's important, and how you can use it. I know it's pretty obvious to you, but I know some listeners might not be familiar with it.
I guess negotiation is just the art of working with somebody else to come up with a solution that works for both parties. In the harder sense, you could use negotiation to say, like, you're trying to win. It's an adversarial relationship where you're sitting across from somebody else and you're trying to get the better of them, or the best deal, or whatever it is. But I think if you look at it as a win-win situation, it's just your ability to communicate with the other person and compromise, and as well as look for advantage. So, for example, if you get to the point where you're going to be selling your business, let's say you're going to sell your business and you put a price tag on it, and we'll just say $100,000 is the price tag. It's just a small business. It's nothing. It's not really a game changer. It's just a little hobby business, hobby side business. So you're going to be selling it for $100,000, and you find a buyer, and the buyer comes in, and they say, "Okay, cool. We like your business." There's a whole stage of I'm shortening things dramatically and just talking about the pricing, because there's other stages to buying a business. But just when it comes to price, so the buyer comes in and he says, "Okay, well, I'll give you $80,000 for your business." So you're willing to sell it for $100,000, but you weren't sure. Maybe there's some flexibility on the terms. Like, maybe you're willing to take $20,000 in cash and then $5,000 for the next, what would that be, like 16 months to get the rest of the payments to get your 100,000. So you're not getting all the money up at once. But the guy who wants to buy, he comes in, he says, I'll give you 80,000 for it. And you think about it, he's like, okay, if you pay me right now or in the next 7 days in cash, I'll take 80,000. And so the negotiation that happened there is that you're now dictating the terms of the payment. He's come in and said what he's willing to pay, and if you can work with that, then you can dictate the terms. And what I heard recently, and I'm not sure who this came from, so whoever originally said it, credit goes to them. But it goes like your price, my terms. My price, your terms. And that was really helpful to me. Not that I've had any negotiations since learning that little phrase, but it just means no matter which side of the table you're on, you have something that you can use to change the deal. You can change the terms, you can change the price. So this is just a very simple example, and it might be over some people's heads because they've never thought about owning or selling a business before. But really, it's just two people talking to one another. And to put it in simpler terms, it could come down to when you go to get a job and somebody says, okay, well, what do you want to get paid? And then you tell them what your rate is, and it's a little bit higher than what maybe the average is. And they say, well, whoa, that's 10% over what we normally pay people. And you could come back and say, and here's where the negotiation comes in, right? Because they basically said, I don't like that. So now here's where you have to communicate and show why you're worth it. You're now negotiating, you're communicating. And you say, well, I've got a new baby on the way, and so to help pay for that, that's why I need this wage. But I realize that it's above the average. And what I'm willing to do for that is that you can call any of my references and they will tell you that I've always been the first person in, I always finish my work on time, and that I'm an absolute pleasure to work with. And things like that are really important to an employer. Somebody who comes in, gets their work done on time, and isn't going to be a pain in their butt and is pretty much guaranteed that they will be awesome from day one, that's worth a lot. The employer would probably be dumb to not just pay the money, because they're getting far more by not having to deal with these personal issues that employees can bring when they get hired.
Thanks so much, Mitch. That's been a very great hour of talking to you. I really appreciate it. Been looking forward to this. You mentioned that you go to bed at around 10, so I can see it's like 10:06 now. Yeah, maybe we should end this now, but thanks a lot for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's 10 at your time. It's only 3 my time here in Canada, so I've still got quite a few hours to get stuff done today. But yeah, I should go and enjoy Easter Sunday with the family. And yeah, it was really great to talk to you, Gray, and it's good to hear that you're continuing on with your podcast and trying to learn from new people and grow your career and help more people along the way. It's fantastic.
Great, man. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Hello, guys and girls. And right before you go, if you sticked around for this long, you're definitely a unicorn. And thanks for listening. I hope you picked up something from it. If you found this helpful, just remember to support the podcast by sharing or write me